All right, looks like we're live now. Welcome everybody, my name's Scott Maier. This is Drawing Together with Artists Network, where we meet every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern to draw together. So we give ourselves a new challenge each week. This week, it's this drawing here, this really cool drawing of this bridge, which gives us the opportunity to explore the architectural structure of arches. So, we've got a lot of challenges here today, especially with this subject. We have the perspective, we have the structure itself, we have, just focusing on the arches as an element. We have texture, we have light, we've got a lot going on in this drawing. So we'll see how far we get today. I think the focus is going to be on really establishing a solid foundation, and then we'll see how the time works out today if we're going to continue to add additional details. So we'll just see how it goes. I'm a little bit nervous about this one. I used a tool, I used the DaVinci Eye app for this preparatory drawing to really just kind of wrap my head around the perspective a little bit, give myself a little bit of confidence. It allows me to overlay the reference image on top of my drawing so I can correct the proportions. I'm gonna go without that today. So I'm a little bit nervous. We'll see how it turns out. But I wanna show you some of the tools that I use to kind of think through structures like this in a kind of a logical way, as far as what logical is what makes sense to me, but that it hopefully gives you a little bit more confidence. So if you are out in the field, if you're drawing from life and you encounter a subject like this, these tools will help you through that, because it can get a little bit overwhelming. So I'd love to hear all your questions, comments, observations as we go along. So if you do have any questions, feel free to type them in all caps. That helps me to identify the questions from the general comments. I'm going to do my best to answer as many of those as I can. But again, this is about an exchange of ideas here. So if you see a question come up and you have a positive solution to that, or kind of an alternative perspective than what I have, that's what this show is all about. We want to hear those things. So welcome everybody. It's good to see all these familiar names. Let's talk through the materials. Today I am working with the same paper I've been using the last couple weeks. This is the Somerset rag. If you want more information about that, go to legionpaper.com. This comes from a mill, I believe, in England. I've been really digging this paper. As you all know, I kind of have a bias towards the rag papers. And so this Somerset one has been one that I've been using for the last couple of weeks. So check that out. You also find in the description below the link to this reference image that's below me, so you can follow along if you'd like, or if you want to sit back and just watch and then draw later, you can. The materials I'm using, I'll be working in graphite, but I think a lot of these principles can be applied to any medium you're choosing. The new tool that I'm going to be using this week is this extra large graphite. We used it last week in that C drawing, so it was a lot of fun. So I'm going to try that again today, see how that works, because part of this process I think is going to be to try to bring order and structure out of a little bit of chaos, if that makes sense. So so we've got this XL. This is the Derwent graphite block that I've been enjoying lately. All right, pencils. I've got a range of graphite pencils. These are the Cezanne, the Creative Mark Cezanne pencils that I love so much. The range I have, what do I have? A 2B, an 8B, and a 12B. So these are all pretty soft. I know some of you that followed along last week didn't quite have that dark of a range, and those drawings I saw were awesome. So if you're seeing something that's different than what I'm using, don't let that stop you. Of course the results are going to look a little bit different, but that's what this show is all about. So a blending stump, I don't like that one. I'm going to get a different one. A blending stump that we're using if we need to. I've got a paper towel here as well to help smooth things out. And I just grabbed a bunch of erasers today. So I've got, of course, my Derwent retractable eraser that I have shaved down to this kind of chisel tip for some of the fine lines. I've got this accurate mechanical eraser that really helps me to bear down when I need to lift more material, as well as this vanish eraser. This has become quickly one of my favorites. I really like this one here. So this is, I believe, made by Accurate as well. Really nice material. You can find these at Jerry's, I believe. And then, of course, my kneaded eraser. It's been well used. So we're in episode, what, 107, I think, and I've been using 2 kneaded erasers for this entire time, so about a year and a half. And I kind of forget which one I've been using, but they both work. So that's it just kind of occurred to me that these kneaded erasers have been with us for a long time. So hi Rachel, thank you for watching from Boulder. Let's see. Sunflower Cherry Flower 12, can you draw perspective, and do you have some video about perspective? I do have, actually have a course on perspective drawing on Artist Network. So any Artist Network members, you'll find that in the library. I believe it's been added to the library. Otherwise, it's a course on drawing perspective, and the goal of that course is to help build an intuitive understanding of perspective. Linear perspective can get very technical and have a lot of components to it. And what I wanted to do in that course was try to kind of organize it in such a way that I'm bringing forward really the things that I use most regularly, and again, develop an intuitive understanding of it so you understand visually when something is off, and then you can apply the tools of perspective to help correct that. So you might want to check that out, but I'll be talking through a lot of those things here as well. So linear perspective can get a little bit overwhelming. Like I said, there's a lot to it, but if you're able to kind of step back a little bit and just focus on some core fundamental concepts, it can help you to stay focused and then and not kind of get overwhelmed in the minutia. So hopefully that's going to make sense as we go along. Tammy, you cheated. That's right, I did cheat on the first one. And I had that video about the DaVinci Eye app that just came out on the Artist Network Facebook page, and there's some really good comments happening about the nature of cheating and using tools. And as you know, I think it's all fair game. They're all tools, and we're only going to grow as artists when we challenge ourselves. And these tools just allow us to grow in the ways that we want. All right, let's see. Welcome everybody. I'm not seeing any other questions, so we'll dig right into it. What do we want to do? I'm a little bit scattered today, so I think I feel like that's the way I start all my episodes lately, is because I'm scattered. I'm bringing up the larger image here on the left where I have the chat, so if you see me kind of looking off to the left, I'm trying to read your chat. And I'm looking at the larger image. I have the smaller one below me though, so that's the one that I'm going to be utilizing the most. And using this large block it was really enjoyable in the last episode because I'm trying to articulate exactly why, but there's something nice about the large scale of it that kind of forces this broad understanding of the forms. And so what I'm doing here is I'm looking at the reference image here, and I'm trying to split my attention between the drawing and the reference image. And so actually I have the screen up in front of me, which allows me to see kind of the action on the page. If I stay focused on the reference image on the left, I see out of my peripheral vision the movement and the forms that are emerging on the page on the right. But the focus is on the reference image, and I'm really just glancing at the page to make sure I'm not way off in my general placement on the page. And I'm just trying to get a basic kind of representation. I just want information on the page at this point. It's not about being accurate. And I'm going to be a little bit intentional about emphasizing that, because one thing I know about myself is that when I start a structure like this, when I start drawing something that's fairly rigid and structural like this, I have a tendency to kind of tighten up in my mind. I get kind of absorbed in the details, and I want to get really tightly controlled. And this large stick helps me to not get kind of pulled into that too early. I want to keep things loose and gestural, keep the energy going, keep a focus on light. And like I said earlier, we're going to try to create order out of chaos. So this is the chaos portion where we're just blocking in elements. And then out of this, we'll see the structures that emerge. And I see things already that need to be adjusted, so I'm just trying to take mental notes. And again, this is really just kind of reacting kind of more intuitively. And then we'll go through and adjust and correct. So one of the things that you might start to do as you're blocking things in and you're establishing the gesture is to start to pay attention to where the forms exit the page. So these intersection points here can be really helpful in orienting yourself. We're going to be utilizing a lot of the tools we use throughout this series, angle sighting, comparative measuring, things like that, and then we'll incorporate some linear perspective. The emphasis on these intersection points becomes a really important tool. And so just kind of start to kind of catalog that in your mind. There are a lot of things that I'm basically, as I'm going through this gesture, I'm kind of pinning some ideas that I'm going to try to then recall later as we go. And so I'm just trying to think through it. So, all right. So what in this initial gesture here, what stands out to me is how dominant really these three arches are. And as we move away, it becomes, they start to merge together. So our big challenge is going to be in getting the spacing between these columns right. Again, I'm kind of just thinking out loud, trying to give voice to some of the things. Actually, it looks like there's a little bump under here. I'm going to wipe this down. Take another stab at it. And now I can, this next pass, start to make some adjustments. So I'm seeing this landform here, moving it down a little bit based on what it was the placement I had before, and then starting to pay attention to the negative space that's forming here. And so again, this is part of that, that goal of mine is to keep things loose early on. I'm trying not to tighten up too early. Focus on those big forms. Focus on a certain sense of abstraction. Oh, the other tool that I forgot to mention that I have is I just have this long strip of a heavyweight paper. It's more like a cardstock that I can use to help mask areas and help with some of the straight edges if I need it. So that's there. Susan, I'm glad you. I don't know when those blocks are going to be showing up, but it sounds like you're excited to use those. I'm really excited. I don't know. I had them for a while and I just didn't use them, and I don't really have a reason why I didn't before. But I'm glad I started using them. They're a lot of fun. The other thing that I'm starting to notice now, again, one of the things I'm kind of cataloging in the mind is the overall structure of light and shadow. And so what I'm looking at is how under each arch, this inside here, we go from dark at the top to kind of light catching along in here and then transitioning into dark. And you can notice that I haven't established the water line, and that's because visually it's very, very subtle. If I squint my eyes, so right now my eyes are blurred, I barely register that line of the water. And so even though I know it's there, I want to be careful not to make that as dominant as it could be. So I'm actually thinking more about these as ovals. All right. And then, you know, from there, we'll kind of divide them into the forms of the arches and establish that waterway. Okay, so this is a hot mess right now. So how can we start to clean it up? Let's see. You know, I think at this point we can start to recognize the form, but you know, at this point, now that we have elements loosely established, we need to move them around. You remember the analogy that we use here a lot is it's kind of like putting together a jigsaw puzzle where we're taking a bunch of pieces out of the box, pouring them on the table, and as we gather information about what's in each piece, then that we move them around and the image starts to emerge. And so we're doing that here as well, as we have some pieces out in front of us, and now we need to gather more information about those pieces. And as we better understand them, they're going to move around on the page until it locks into something that is more accurate and recognizable. Let's see, Mary, I was asking, am I using the very soft graphite? What am I using? This is the soft XL graphite, not the very soft. But I really like the way it works with the rag paper here. All right. It's a little tricky. What do I want to do now? I want to do some, I'm going to draw with the eraser a little bit just to help remove some of the bulk from the drawing. And I think what can be really helpful at this point is I want to find the center of the image. And so I'm going to find that horizontally across, find the center of the image. So somewhere, so right about here is the center of the image. And now I want to find the center on the reference image. So I have this larger one here on the left. If I find that center, if this is the center here, then there's this central arch. You know, we have this large one on here on the right. The next one over is more in the center. The kind of the far side of that is just to the right of the center of the page. And now I can measure vertically here and see where the center is there. So if the center of the page is here, roughly, then let's see, that kind of puts us kind of roughly at this part of the arch. there's not very much in there to describe that form. But I've got my harder graphite here. This is the 2B, and I'm going to kind of build out from that center a little bit. And one of the things that can be helpful with the arch is to try to break it down into a sequence of shorter, straighter marks and then find that curve. And so one of the things I notice is there's this gap here between this arch and then the kind of the outer edge of the next one. And it's not a symmetrical formation. So the curve here is not this kind of a reflection of this curve. They're kind of at different angles. So if you're able to find these angles here, that can sometimes help to then orient yourself to the quality of the curve around this outer edge here. Sorry, I'm not articulating myself as effectively as I would like to. So if I'm just making nonsense, please let me know. So now what's starting to emerge is an understanding of where that water line is, just based on how that curve is being broken down. So what I'm looking for is that very specific shape here. And that is influenced by the water line. And one of the things that was really challenging in my preparatory drawing was that I had a tendency to exaggerate those lines. We can kind of see that they're kind of tilted, but the truth is that they're much more horizontal than they are angled. So that's, again, I had a tendency to kind of exaggerate that. So this is where you might use angle sighting. So what I'm doing here is I'm closing one eye, I'm aligning my pencil here with the angle that I'm targeting in the reference image, kind of locking that down. So in this case, I have the large reference image here. I'm aligning the pencil with this bottom edge here to find that angle. And if I lock my wrist, carry it across, and I place it on top of the drawing, so the drawing is in front of me, the projection of the drawing is in front of me, I can compare what's on the page with where it should be with regards to the reference. And kind of make some mental notes about where this edge of the column might be. And what might be helpful is that once you find that where that water line is, establish vertical lines so that that arch comes down, and where it makes contact with the water is a vertical edge, and then it starts to slope away above and below it. So again, kind of thinking about those arches as a sequence of shorter, straighter marks can sometimes be helpful. All right, so we're starting to see some of these forms emerge, kind of building out from the center. If I've moved a little bit off to the right, I'm now going to move off to the left. And if this is kind of locked in as kind of that back edge of the second arch from the right, second one over here, if that becomes my anchor, everything else can kind of build out from there. So let's see, how do I want to do that? Give myself a rough line to indicate that water line. It's going to pass through all of these columns here. It's not accurate, but it gives me some sort of orientation point. What I'm not confident in right now is this shape. So I'm going to actually, what I'm going to do is compare the width to the height. And what I see is that on the reference photo, the width here, it's a quarter the distance compared to the height. So if we take this as our standard unit of measure, we should be able to measure up 1, 2, 3, 4. So pretty close actually. So what I was just using there is a tool called comparative measuring. So similar to the angle sighting, I'm closing one eye, so I'm flattening my depth perception. I'm using my pencil as a tool, and I'm aligning this edge here with this edge on the reference photo, sliding my thumb down so that it aligns with this side of that column here on the reference photo to give myself a measurement. Then I turn it vertically, keeping my arm outstretched and keeping this distance consistent, and then comparing that dimension to the height of that opening. And so what I might do is actually bring this in just a little bit. So if I'm going to lock in the height here, maybe I'll lock this side down, just bring this side in a little bit more, because that's going to help me then establish this distance out from here, the inside of that arch. So let me take that measurement again and measure across. So 1, 2, and a little bit more. So if I take this measurement on the reference photo, I should be able to measure 1, 2, and a little bit, which then suggests that that opening is way the heck over here. Yikes. That seems really, really far over, but I could be right. As I'm drawing it in there, I'm going to trust the measurement and realize that in my initial gesture, I'd really moved everything over too far. I didn't really account for this dimension effectively. as I come down here, so you notice when I'm drawing these ovals, I'm not doing it as one smooth motion. I'm kind of establishing kind of the top, the bottom, the left, and the right, kind of breaking it down into these sections. Make sure there's a vertical axis here. And I'm going to talk through some tools that you might be able to use to help with that. So when I'm looking at that bottom edge here, I'm looking at that negative space in the reference photo, the distance between this bottom edge and the bottom edge of the paper there, to help orient myself. So we haven't really gotten into any sort of linear perspective at this point. We're still using the same tools that we use in almost every episode. But again, I'll kind of talk through some tools from linear perspective that you can use to help kind of reorient yourself if you get lost. Emily D is asking, is it compressed charcoal? No, I'm using graphite. So this is a graphite stick that I have here. I do have a set of the compressed charcoal that's very similar, and I'll be using that for other drawings, but today it's the graphite. Okay. Now what I want to do is I'm gonna kind of bounce back and forth again here from the center, and what I want to do is compare this width here to the width of that column face there. And what I notice when I'm observing the reference photo is that this distance is a little bit narrower than that. So if I take this distance, carry across here, give myself a little bit more, and I was actually pretty close in my initial take. Now I'm right-handed, so I have the benefit of being able to orient myself for this curve here where I can just kind of pivot on the wrist. But I want to kind of be careful with that. It's a very satisfying movement to be able to create this nice smooth arc, but it may also be very specific. Why did my camera shut off? Okay, let's see here. All right, we're back. I don't know what happened there. Are we in focus? I think we're in focus. Sorry about that. The joys of technology. I spent all morning because things seem to not be functioning properly with my computer. But we got it back and running. Oh, are you kidding me? Okay. Going on here. I apologize for the interruption. It says we're good to go, so I don't know why my camera is just randomly shutting off. Thank you all for being awesome and supportive through a very frustrating experience. So if it keeps failing, I don't know what I'll do. I'll probably continue and try to find a recording. Speaking of which, next week I won't be able to make it live, so I'll be posting a recording for that, but it'll come out live at the same time, so it'll be a premiere set to the same time as normal. So thank you all for being, again, supportive and understanding. Good times. Okay, back to it. Now that I have confidence that my camera is going to work for us. All right, so now this central oval has become an anchor for this. Before I move down to the next one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to establish this angle here, kind of an axis that's going to help to keep the tops of each of these arches in line. Now, in order to do that, I need a few pieces of information. One of which is, where does that line kind of exit the page? So somewhere right around here. And where does it originate? So somewhere right around down in here. So I can give myself a little bit more information. Oh, for criminy sake. I don't know why this is doing this. All right, let me see if this helps. I'm gonna set it up as a photo. So right now I can imagine somebody coming on and saying, "What the hell is this that we're watching?" So I apologize. Stay with us, don't leave. All right. Let's see if it will work now. I think it's my... Thank you all for waiting. Thank you, Wilma, for helping. I don't know what is happening. My capture card seems to not want to play nicely right now. So, how's everybody's week? While I try to figure this out. Everybody think of the oceanscape drawing last week. There's some great drawings. All right, let's see. All right, we have it back for at least for a little while. We'll see, but if it continues, and it's just going to be an exercise in frustration. I'm going to try to move very quickly for some of the things that are going to be most helpful for establishing the arch. So, again, finding the origination of this edge on the right as well as the left. And then you can use angle sighting to help with that. So I'm taking this, aligning it with this kind of implied line running along the top of each of these arches. And then comparing it to the reference. And so what I feel like I've done is I've made it too steep. I think I need to bring this down here a little bit. And actually, I can try to visualize that here. So I might need to bring that up a little bit. So what we're looking for is a line kind of something like that. I think I might have exaggerated that even more. So because I'm not getting much of an alignment here, something is starting to seem off. I need to come back to this measurement again. So I think really where this line needs to be is more at a kind of a shallower angle. So something more like that, which would then suggest that this ellipse should make contact right about here. So now, this is the logic loop that I'm trying to make here. And this is part of the fun of problem solving with perspective, and why I think it's really helpful to challenge yourself in this way. But if you do get lost and you need the help of tools like that DaVinci Eye app, or tracing or something, it can also help you to kind of bridge some of those issues a bit. Okay, so that is where my brain says it should be. Let me measure this distance here. So if I take this from the bottom to the water line and carry up, that puts me right at the top of that arch there. which is pretty much accurate. Now let me take a comparison of the width versus the height. And this is essentially, it's twice as tall as it is wide. So if I take this measurement here, I can carry across to this, and it should measure twice, which puts me actually right about here, as kind of splitting the difference between each of these arches. So now I've got a hot mess on the page where I've got three or four different kind of attempts at that arch. But this, based on my comparative measuring, suggests that this is going to be more accurate. Now let me check the placement of that water line. So I should be able to measure this distance here, 1, 2.5. And now this is measuring 3. So what, I think that sounded all very confusing. So what I'm doing is I'm measuring from the bottom of the page to that water line here. I'm comparing that to the entire height of the page. And what I see in the reference image is that I should be able to take this measurement, measure up 1, so from here, 1, 2, and then a half. So 1, and then a half. So the top of the drawing paper should be actually somewhere right around there. So I've got quite a bit that's off right now. I think I need to bring this up. And that's getting closer. That water line is perhaps more about there. Bringing that up there. Again, comparing this here, so 1 and almost a half. So I think that's much more accurate now. And then now this might have to adjust accordingly. So let me kind of minimize that. So now going back to this being the anchor, if I'm confident in the placement here, now I need to adjust the ellipse over here. So I'm going to go back to this, that angle there that represents the implied line across the top of all the arches, and it should really be closer to that. So all I'm doing right now is, I start the drawing with kind of my best guess at things. I'm going with how things feel. And now I'm reconciling that, against some of the information that I'm gathering, in correcting those observations. And what's fascinating about that is that as I do that, it's changing how I observe the reference photo. That's really one of the powerful things about drawing, is that by taking the time to really analyze the subject, we become more attuned to the subject, we come to a deeper appreciation of it. Now, let's see. I'm going to try to establish the angle here of that top of the bridge. So I'm looking at, I'm fairly confident in the intersection here, and if you need help locating where the edge of the bridge is here, where it intersects with the top of the page, drop a plumb line down and see how it relates to this section of the bridge. And it should be just to the right of this mark here, this edge of that column there. When I'm using this eraser, I'm intentionally being very light with it because I want it to just kind of smooth out some of the marks without lifting too much. So remember what I was saying earlier about this being kind of largely about creating order from chaos. That's certainly starting to take place here. All right, so now that we have a clearer understanding of where the top of this arch should be and where it originates from the water, then it starts to become easier to establish that pathway there. And one of the things that is really kind of fascinating right now is how different my drawing looks from my perspective here versus when I see it vertically there. And drop that shadow down again. This is a bit of an implied line. I was having a discussion yesterday about the difference between kind of digital drawing and kind of traditional drawing with traditional materials. Because I've been experimenting with digital drawing, and I love the idea of being able to hit a button and it undoes what I just made. And that there can be a lot of benefit in that. And one of the benefits to working from life is that panic that you might feel when you put a mark down and you're not sure if it's going to lift, right? And I have to admit that I'm kind of going through some of that panic mode right now because I'm making a mess on the page, and it's possible that it's not going to clean up. So what I need to remind myself then is that then there starts to become power in the resulting image, in that it shows the mental struggle that an artist might go through to solve the problem and fix, kind of put all the puzzle pieces together, as it were. And so I hope I kind of put that out there in case any of you who, like me, can get frustrated with the results sometimes. I kind of, like I said, I kind of remind myself that, what the drawing captures is that struggle. We all like those stories of, persevering through adversity, and so a drawing that is flawed kind of taps into that quality, I think, sometimes. So you can see what happened here is I was kind of feeling out the curve on this side here. In my initial attempt, had me exiting the drawing on the vertical edge rather than the bottom. And so then when I observe that in the reference photo, it exits the drawing here, then it adjusts the arc. So again, starting from kind of where the center might be, you're starting with kind of vertical edges, observing where they exit and end, and then trying to kind of piece those together here. I'm going to darken this in so I have a little bit of a value contrast. It seems like my camera decided to work now, so it's not shutting off, but as I say that, it's probably going to shut off any second now. Okay, I want to talk about these marks here in a little bit, but first I'm going to keep moving down the drawing here. I'm going to leave the water line here a bit ambiguous at this point. I want to start to give myself a little bit more information here on the left. Mr. S, all thumbs with my new iPad. That's the way I feel. I started drawing on an iPad. It's tough. It's so different. Oh, and then Jean had a question about which line I was drawing. Yeah, it looks like you were able to discern that we were drawing the implied lines that represent the top of the arches here. And so far, I'm kind of just drawing it freehand. If you're interested in drawing straight lines freehand, the thing that I can help, really the only advice I can give you is to practice drawing from the shoulder as much as possible. So really lock the wrist, lock the fingers. You can see I'm holding the pencil fairly far back, and it's really about moving the entire arm. It's going to be a straighter line that way. If you start to engage the wrist, there's a natural curve to this. There's a natural curve when you start to move the fingers, and that's a lot to manage if you're trying to manipulate a line by controlling all of these hinges in your arm. So try to limit that down and limit the motion to one joint. The shoulder, I think, is going to be the best, and allow everything else to extend from there. Of course, you're going to have to bend your elbow in order to make that happen. But again, you're trying to limit the amount of bending that's happening, I think, to help with the straight edge. And one of the things that I found really helpful too is to sometimes shift to this overhand grip, aligning the pencil with the path that you want, to help you kind of visualize, and then you're dragging up along that path. So those are kind of two tools that you might employ to help draw a straight line freehand. You see, I've used this strip of paper here a little bit, but not a whole lot. I'll show you how I use that more as we get through the drawing. All right, so this is starting to feel a little bit better. This is a lot more work than it was when I was using some of those other tools in tracing, but that's what makes it so much fun. Oh, Tammy's asking, where's that eraser shaving vacuum? This thing that's accurate. This little vacuum here will suck up some of the debris. It's kind of fun. I'll set that over here. Whew. All right. Oh, it looks like, yeah, I've seen some other conversations here. Sorry, it probably feels like I'm just staring off into space, but I'm trying to read the chat at the same time. So again, if you do have a question and it's helpful to type in all caps, I see it more easily. I think I got everything, but if I did miss a question earlier, please type it again. I sometimes just miss them, and I don't particularly enjoy missing a comment. So just as we established an implied line representing the top of the arches, we need to establish one for the bottom arches as well. So what we're looking for is that implied line in which the reflection of those arches makes that contact. So, holy smokes, I think I nailed that. Now this is where an understanding of, kind of an intuitive understanding of perspective can come in handy. So with this line established, you can see how this line here, it's not a parallel line. It's a parallel edge on the bridge. Literally it's parallel, but optically they're two different angles, and it creates this wedge-like form. So we have a steeper angle to that outer edge, a more horizontal angle to this inner edge, and as we establish that implied line, it becomes even more shallow. Because what we're doing, if you kind of have, again, building an intuitive understanding of angles, your horizon line is going to be flat, right? And all of these angles are parallel with one another on the bridge. They're all going to converge to a common vanishing point off here, off to the left, which means that you can kind of envision a sense that these lines radiate out from one another. They pivot around that edge, right? And so that's a big thing that I hold in my mind, is where is that anchor roughly, and do these lines feel like they could extend and kind of pivot around that anchor point? Now, what I like about that is that when you've built an intuitive understanding for it, you can actually kind of manipulate it a little bit. So if you've looked at M.T. Escher's work, for example, he creates his Escherian staircases, the ones that seem to never end, because he knows that when you create something that's close to accurate in perspective, we'll accept it as accurate. So he can manipulate it in subtle ways, so on first glance it looks like it's correct perspective, when in reality it's not. If you were to actually trace those orthogonal lines out to vanishing points, they wouldn't quite line up. But we as viewers, we have an intuitive understanding, and we kind of understand that as long as these lines are generally leading in the correct direction, that we're going to naturally assume that they're correct in terms of perspective, that they're parallel. So, so now having established a rough understanding of where that vanishing point might be, I can use that to help place this implied line here, the water's edge, right? And so it's not quite horizontal, because as a viewer, we're a little bit higher. Our horizon line is probably going to be upward, somewhere right around here, where it's going to be more horizontal. So there's a slight angle here. And then there's going to be another angle off to the right, where this other dimension of the bridge, where they're going to converge at that common vanishing point. So again, the horizon line is going to be somewhere right around here. This line here is going to radiate out from a vanishing point off to the right, and so that means that as I come across the page, these lines are going to become increasingly horizontal as we move across the drawing, if that makes sense. So again, I'm just kind of making sure that those primary lines create that impression that they're radiating out. Even if they're off a little bit, we can continue to massage those and correct those. So, so let me lock down. Let me lock this down a little bit more here. And now I can actually, and all I'm doing is I'm kind of using this finger as a pivot point. And then I can establish that the angles for the other side of the bridge, the reflection of the bridge. Now I think I'm gonna do this rather than, I drew that line to establish that edge, and I'm kind of kicking myself because it's gonna be a fairly permanent line. What I should have done is this, which is to mask that line and build up the shape of value up to that edge there. And it's just a little bit more gentle of an edge that, that might be easier to manage a little bit later. So as I fall along this edge, I'm just kind of giving it this kind of slight vibration because I want to be more delicate with those lines. So getting back to that concept of using tools and cheating and things like that, you know, there were moments in my life when I felt like for some reason using a straight edge was cheating. And I don't know where you're all at with that, but I don't know, I feel so much better about drawing when I don't have that mindset where I think everything becomes fair game and I'm in control of how I want to grow as an artist, right? And so, I think there was a time when I embraced that challenge of trying to draw straight edges, but I learned very quickly that quality may not set me apart as an artist, so from others, so. All right, so now what I want to do is I'm going to draw the line for the railing. So I need to see where it intersects with the edge of the page. I'm going to drop a plumb line down against the reference photo and find that it's actually directly above this point right here, just about. So I can carry that plumb line down. Brings me right about here. If I have that point and a rough starting point here, then that gives me an edge that I can orient myself to. So I'm using the side of the pencil again. It's just a little bit more gentle of a mark. And I'll freehand it on top. Make it a little bit more organic. So that's established now, those main lines, and I need to reestablish this angle here representing the implied top edge of the arches. I need to move myself back across here. Now, there are kind of some tricks in perspective that I can show you that might help you to achieve this. So it's going to take up a little bit of time for the drawing, so I probably won't have time to finish the drawing, but I want to show you this because I think it's kind of cool. It's true. And then Susan asking, wouldn't your water line be your horizon line? Now, in this case, it wouldn't necessarily be my horizon line because we're actually elevated above the water, and you can kind of feel that out on the reference photo. You can find the specific angle across here of that water line. If that water extended all the way out as though you're looking out on the ocean, then it would. Oh man, what is happening? I think my capture card might be failing. I need a new one. Okay. This will be a fun one. Okay. But yeah, so getting back to that horizon line, if we were to extend that water line all the way out to the edge, then it would be. If we were right down, like with our eyes in the water, then it would be horizontal as well. So what that tells us is observing that there's a bit of an angle here to that water line, then that angle helps to illuminate for us where our position is relative to the water, if that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Now, if we, I'm going to make a box out of this. So we've got the top edge here. I'm going to create a box on the far right and far left. Okay. Now we've created a rectangle in which that oval sits. If we connect the opposing corners, it gives us the perspective center. So that tells us where the center of that box would be when drawn in perspective. And now what I'm observing here is that the top of my ellipse is a little bit shifted off. This is a way to help correct the perspective of your ellipse. So by finding that perspective center, I know then this is the apex of that curve. This is the apex here of that curve. We have the outer edges here, and then from there we can adjust the curves of that ellipse. There's this intersection point here where you have this diagonal line. It intersects that curve. If we were to follow the rules of perspective, carry this angle down, this right here creates an implied line here. So then you can start to visualize kind of the quality of the curve building off of that perspective center. Now we need to build that down farther here. So how can we do that? Let's see, I'm trying to think about how to articulate it. What I actually should do now is I'm going to establish, instead of the outer edges of these columns here, I'm going to imply a vertical edge that runs through the center of these columns here. Starting to get a little messy. But I'm visualizing the center of these columns. And then adjusting the perspective center there a little bit. Now, if we were to, now that we have the center of this rectangle here, we have a horizontal, we have our kind of our center here along the vertical edge. We have this top edge here. If we carry a line from this point here through our center and up, that gives us another even spacing to where the center of the next column is going to be. So what I'm essentially doing here, let me grab a scrap piece of paper. Oh, actually, I can just use this. If we were to draw a rectangle like this, this is just two-dimensional, no perspective applied, and divide it, that's giving us perspective center. Now we're just putting that rectangle in perspective into something that's somewhat like this. And it's showing us the spacing where that center line should be given the rules of perspective. Now, if we create a series of, if we had an evenly spaced sequence of boxes, we could end up with a situation like this, where we can find perspective center of each box. And what you're going to notice is a pattern is that you can connect that perspective center here to that perspective center there. Or we have from this corner here, we have this angle here, this angle here, this angle here. We create a repetition of those angles. And so all we're doing now is we are putting that two-dimensional concept into play. So the way we're doing that is we're running a line here from perspective center here along the bottom edge to through the center of this edge, carrying it up, and that gives us the center of the next box down. And we can drop a line down. That's going to be the center of the next oval. We're going to carry that up through this line here, up to the next center here, and we're making this kind of zigzag pattern using that perspective center. So if I'm coming from the bottom here, perspective center, up through the center of the left side, this is going to be where the center of the next oval exists. And now we have the center there. And once I've established the right side here, I can draw another line up, and there's the perspective center of the next oval. And my camera just quit. So I don't know if that works, if that makes sense. So that, again, in this way, I can start to move my way down the drawing, and I'm indicating where perspective center is for each of those ovals. Now what's missing are the right edges, and so the right and left sides here. So I need to evaluate the spacing this way here. And I can use comparative measuring to do that. So I've got this implied line here that tells me where the top of each ellipse should be, where the bottom should be, and I have a way to indicate where the center of that ellipse should be given perspective. So if I take, what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare this dimension here. I apologize, this is a bit messier than I would like it to be, but 1, 2, 3. And what I see is that this gap here, this distance here on the outer edge of the column is 1/4 of this distance here. So we should be able to measure 4 across here of this dimension. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Pretty close actually. So I'll bring that in just a little bit. So where's the horizon line? That's going to be about perspective center. So I'm creating a line that runs from the perspective center of this ellipse through the center, not the water line, but the center, which is right about here. Now, I very rarely use this literally. This is, again, one of those things that I try to build a more intuitive understanding of, just to help me with that spacing. And so the fact that I'm being more precise here it's a little uncomfortable because it's not really how I operate, but I thought it could be helpful to show you as a tool. Now, did that make sense? I hope it does. Now I can measure across from here. If this becomes a unit of measure, the next opening is twice as wide as the width of that column. So 1, 2. And you can see that I'm really drawing ellipses, not arches. I'm not drawing an arch and then flipping it. I'm drawing that full ellipse. And so now here's that center line. So roughly the next opening the center should be right about there. Now the other thing that it can be helpful using this perspective center tool, because it gives you a vertical axis, a central axis, to help make sure that your ellipse isn't kind of angling left or right. I want to clean this up a little bit. All right, Aaron. Thank you. Thank you, Greg, for those comments. I don't know. There's so many ways things can go wrong in a drawing. All I can do is laugh at the technical challenges. Okay, so how is this working out? We have now this major one here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we have 3 more to fit in that narrow space. So that's, again, one of those intuitive things about a perspective that you can start to build the more you play with it, in that, you know, as we get farther away, as we start to shear across surfaces, you take a lot of information and you're cramming it into increasingly small spaces. So if you think about how much space it takes to span three of these openings here on the right, now we've got to fit 3 openings on this side on a bridge that literally all those openings are the same size, right? And so this is, again, we've talked about it before. There's a difference between the literal and the optical truth. And I really am frustrated by this right now. And I don't know why my camera keeps shutting off. Okay. All right, let's see if that does anything. I just kind of reset the battery. Let's go for it. All right. Now, I kind of implied this end of the bridge, but I could be off there, so I need to double check that. Again, giving myself the horizon line, I need to make that a little bit more visual here. If I run a line from here through the center, that bridge, that column there, the next ellipse should be right about here. And so what I want to kind of keep in mind is kind of roughly observing the distance here, this opening, compared to this column. And the columns get increasingly closer together. And now what I was saying earlier is, like, the viewer is going to be very forgiving with certain things with regards to perspective. The viewer's mind, all of our minds we're very good at manipulating visual information to fit our expectations of what we think we should see. So as long as we have a basic structure established, the viewer is going to do, their brains are going to do whatever it takes to fit that information into that structure. So there's a threshold there where if it's off by too much, it's going to feel uncomfortable. But I think as long as you're in the ballpark in terms of getting it right, if you get the major structure correct, you've got a little bit of leeway here. So, for example, each of these may be slightly off based on what I'm observing in the reference photo, but as a whole, it seems to be consistent with perspective, so I'm going to call it good for now. All right. Whew. All right, thank you, Tammy. You're still with us. Let's see. So again, hopefully that makes sense, that that, you know, what I was talking about, the perspective center. It's been a while since I taught it. It is something I cover in the course, and it really becomes helpful when, you know, putting like fence posts in or things that are evenly spaced. That the convention of perspective center can be used in so many different ways, but I wanted to kind of talk through some of the basic way that I try to employ it here. All right, so now this is a far more linear approach than what I typically take. So I'm going to I'm just going to wipe this down using the palm of my hand and start to build a sense of light and shadow. So now we can make this look better. But I wanted to get through that because that's really the trickiest part, in case the camera says it's done again, or we just kind of run out of time. So, all right, I'm glad I'm getting some good feedback. But again, if I wasn't clear, please let me know, and I will do my best to kind of clarify that. With perspective in particular, I've encountered some students who kind of beat themselves up for not kind of getting it. And I really hope that's not something that you're doing yourself, because it can be tricky. So be patient. And when I was teaching, I would view it as my responsibility to find a different way of explaining it if it's not clicking. So. But I kind of want to call that out, because I feel like more than any other concept in drawing, it's students that struggled with perspective that really where the frustration really amplified. And so if that is you, I just encourage you to stick with it and try to find as many different ways of describing it. It is one of those things where we're confronting our own brain's operation, is doing things, you know, without us really, really being aware. And a lot of times when we struggle with drawing in perspective, it just means that our brain is set to solve a different set of problems. So you try to find as many different ways of tackling this subject to better understand it. So I'm looking over here, and something is a little bit off, because I'm looking at that negative space compared to what I see in the reference photo. And so I need to evaluate that. I'm going to draw these horizontal lines here. Oh, there goes the camera again. Yeah, I think my capture card is shot, because it seems to just keep cutting out. And then my camera thinks, oh, there's no action happening, so I can shut off. Since you don't need me for anything, my camera says I'll shut off, but that's because my capture card is struggling. Okay. We're back. I might just have to keep doing this while we work through it. So again, so just looking at this here, there's something just that looks off with regards to that negative space. So I want to evaluate a little bit how that that information over here. So first thing I'm going to do is compare the width here to the width of that opening. And I think what I see is it's really about a 1-to-1 relationship. So if I take this opening here, carry it across, it's pretty close, but I feel like I'm cropping a little bit of the reference photo. Now, coming back to the horizon line, you can look in that distant shore and you can start to get a better understanding where the horizon line is. And you can see that it's higher than that water line. So that's a way to help visualize that. And I can't really see it. We only see the water through these gaps here. But those edges become helpful in terms of orienting ourselves. And now what I want to do is switch to, I'll switch to the 8B, and I'm just going to try to work quickly at least block it in. So we won't get all the detail in this, but so I think I'll need to run to the store and pick up a new capture card. But we want to start to now establish the basic value relationships. So as I'm blocking in those backgrounds, you see I'm not being very precious with that line. You know, I was a bit careful with it earlier, and now I'm being fairly careless. And in that way, what I'm hoping is that it continues to add some life to the drawing. Now, there are some implied lines along the inner edges of these arches that I think are going to be helpful. So this is again where it kind of comes back to having an intuitive understanding of where that vanishing point is off to the right. So if I envision a vanishing point off here on the right, maybe drop that down a little bit, then these the textural lines here, these brick lines and these stains on the walls will seem to radiate out from that point. And so I'm here in this way, I'm just using this as kind of a mask. But if if you're not interested in using those tools, again, just try to visualize that these lines here would essentially, they should feel like they would converge at a common vanishing point. Even if they don't literally do it, if they're off by a little bit, it should have that impression that they're leading back to that vanishing point. And then we have kind of implied edges along here as well. And so then what happens is that as you move across here, as we're seeing like these stain lines across here, as we move across to the left, these edges are gradually becoming more horizontal. They're getting closer to that horizon line. It's funny, I learned, kind of going back to that M.C. Escher discussion, I learned a lot about linear perspective by looking at his work and specifically how he was able to achieve those optical illusions, essentially by doing it wrong, right? He made these amazing effects. So his understanding of perspective allowed him to kind of manipulate it in such a way that it created these really unique forms. So as I'm moving across, I'm doing two things. I'm evaluating this angle relative to the one to the right of it, but I'm also trying to look at it globally, kind of step back and look at the whole drawing at once. And if you haven't set your drawing up and looked at it from a distance, it's really important that you do so regularly to help keep, help you become aware of things that might be off a little bit. So. Oh, did I add too many? Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I see 7 too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I see 7 openings. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's the last one there. But I didn't connect it to the shoreline here. Am I counting incorrectly? I hope I'm not counting incorrectly. That happens so much in perspective drawing. All right. All right. Thank you for the comments here. Let me know if there's anything else. And thank you for the comments, Wilma, about technical difficulties. I don't know this has been the worst with the camera. I thought I fixed it by I have a dummy battery in there, so it just plugged in as an adapter, so I don't have to worry about my batteries running dead or anything anymore. but now I think my capture card is a little bit worn out after 107 episodes. So, okay, so now we're kind of blocking in the major forms here. I think this is going to be kind of critical, this hill line here. So now what I can do with these arches established, I can use that as a reference to place that intersection here on the hillside. And I'm just going to sketch this in. Again, this is, we talk about that a lot on this show, you know, the degree to which we apply detail is going to be unique to each of us. If you know, if you're so inclined to get in there and render every little brick, go for it. If you want to keep your drawing at a stage like this, go for it. Now here's how I might start to sharpen it up. So this is where using this this strip of paper as a tool can be helpful. So I'm just using it as a way to mask that edge rather than draw a line which is then filled. And I don't know why particularly why I like to use a strip of paper. I think probably because it's thinner. Like I have a hard time with the bulk of a ruler or other straight edge. And there is something about it being light and movable that can be helpful. But you can sometimes, it's easy to slide the pencil underneath it. So one of the things, again, kind of focusing on that intuitive understanding about perspective, this ledge here has two dimensions. It's got one dimension that leads across the length of the bridge. You also have the width dimension. If you're going to be creating kind of hatch marks, you can start to align those with the general rules of perspective. So make these a little bit steeper. Again, envisioning a vanishing point off to the right here. If those marks were to radiate out from that vanishing point, they would be steeper here and then gradually become more horizontal as we recede. So now with that kind of blocked in, you can use your eraser, take a good eraser like this, and lift off some material here. Again, creating an edge that is kind of sharp without drawing a line. And then with that railing, we need to move that other drawing here. I'm just going to mask over that railing line. And use the broad side of this eraser to lift off some of the sky. Ooh, hit my electric eraser there. And then if I need to go back in and sharpen up the railing, you can in certain areas as well. I just, for me, I prefer to have a bit more variation in the line, so I try not to be too hard and consistent with edges. Have some areas that kind of fall apart, some that are a little bit clearer, some that are kind of mechanically drawn, and some that are more freehand, kind of mix it up. But that's just really my personal preference. And then if you want to suggest the vertical railings here, you can as well. All right, thank you everybody. Thank you for the comments. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. Actually, I want to lift off some of this down in here. So now we can focus on light in this drawing. I'm going to do some negative drawing here. So I'm going to refine this edge by drawing that background. And I'm going to intentionally keep that background, that landscape, a little sketchy. And then what I like about this over here is that play in values, where you have dark and light, you have a dark and light relationship here, and a dark and light relationship here. And there's a bit of a transition, but I want to play with that a little bit. So I'm going to lift off some of the light here from the sky. Actually, not going to lift it down here in the reflection yet. Give it a little bit of contrast between the reflection and the actual sky. Okay, so now as we go through, I want to start to sharpen up this edge. It's a little bit closer. Again, I want to be careful not to draw a line so much. I'm working on that edge, so it's a matter of coming back and forth from the center of the form up to that edge to refine it. And as we come down here, we can, actually I'm going to use a smaller eraser here, start to sharpen that up using the eraser. So we get a nice light striking right in along in here on the insides of these bridge supports. So kind of thinking really more about edges along here. We've kind of established the elliptical paths for this drawing, but so now we're looking at value relationships along those paths. So as I'm just going to kind of imply some of the texture here. So rather than erasing it down entirely, kind of letting the eraser kind of skip across the surface and create a certain amount of unevenness to imply those stones. And I think now that I have that established, I do think I need to lift off some of the value here to render that that path of the bridge there. And I'm going to let that just kind of be fuzzy. That's a reflection. And so I can create that impression by being a little less precise with regards to the sharpness of those edges. So to create some of that contrast there. Oh yeah, Vanellope is asking. I don't really get where the light source is. It was really tricky for me too. If you look at the reference photo, you can what I came back to is looking at the reference photo and studying the light in the sky, and you can see on the far right is where it starts to get lighter and brighter. So my understanding is that the light is coming from that far right and it's kind of setting, and we're getting a lot of bounce light against this. That's what threw me off at first, is that there's a fair amount of light striking this face of the bridge, even though the light source is actually over here, kind of shining back this way. And so it's reflecting off of something over here. That was kind of throwing off my understanding of that light as well. So I'm glad you brought that up. That was, that was something that I kind of forgot that I kind of struggled with in that the preparatory drawing for this this video. So now as we come up here, I'm going to sharpen this as well and observe again that the value relationship, just asking fundamental questions like, is this lighter or darker than? So in this case, this is darker than the bridge forms around it. And then before I lighten this, I'm going to establish those darks, and then that gives me a better understanding of how much lighter I need to make some of these forms. So with this dark form established, I can kind of, again, starting from the center of the form, work up to the edge to sharpen this edge here. Actually, I think I need a little bit of contrast here to figure out how much lighter to make this. So using the eraser, it's all about pressure. So I'm being very gentle with it now, and then gradually increasing that pressure as I need to lift more material. But I don't want to be too aggressive with it. And with these rubber erasers, you can kind of just let it float across the surface a little bit. And now as we come across here, again, I can sharpen things up a little bit. Now, you might find it beneficial to try to mask off an ellipse like this, but I don't really have an effective tool for doing that. So when I'm looking at the direction of my marks, I'm thinking about the two primary dimensions of the object. Now, in this case, the inside of that ellipse has the curve of that kind of cylindrical curve that we can use to describe the dimension of the ellipse, and then you also have the depth, right? So when I'm making my marks, I'm trying to reduce those marks to one of those two. So if I'm cross-hatching, then the marks I'm running this direction, I'm trying to be aware of where that vanishing point is. Again, that's why it's helpful to have an intuitive understanding of perspective. And I don't need to make sure all of those lines literally lead to the vanishing point, but if I have that in my mind, it helps me to adjust the angle of my cross-hatching. And then, again, if I shift here in the cross-hatching, I'm thinking about enforcing the curve. So these are the cross-contour marks that help to reinforce the structure of the objects. Now in this case, I'm going to let it run long on this side here, and then clean that up with the eraser. And then just looking down here, I do think I need to sharpen this up a little bit. This becomes a bit of a focal point. And then this becomes a bit darker. So just kind of working my way back down the length of the bridge. Where as we move across here, then the contrast becomes greater between the light striking on the inside of the arch versus the shadow on the outer edge. So I'm going to kind of drop the value to represent the shadow, and then I'm going to use the eraser to pull out some of the highlights. So now that as I'm doing that, you can see I adjusted the angle of my marks to reinforce the perspective of that vertical plane of the bridge. So as I'm rendering the shadows here, as I'm dropping those values, I'm intentionally running them vertically to reinforce that dimension, and then I can change the direction of my marks to reinforce the other dimension of the arch this way, if that makes sense. So I find that if you're working on kind of cleaning up these forms and creating nice, crisp, clean drawings, the approach that I take is really trying to be gradual with it, and take multiple stabs at it. So I'm not worried about kind of getting the right value and then preserving it. I'm thinking about tackling it multiple times and gradually refining it. And I'm going to let that background here sit a little bit, maybe force the perspective by lowering the contrast. So there's atmospheric perspective that we can employ to reinforce the depth. The idea behind that is that areas of high contrast tend to advance and areas of low contrast tend to recede. So if I preserve my lightest lights and my darkest darks for generally the foreground area, then that'll help advance. And then if I reduce the contrast in the background, that'll help that recede. All right, so now let's bring out the eraser as the drawing tool and start to kind of capture some of that light here. So here I think I can pull pull off a little bit more light, sharpen up the edges. So I'm using my retractable eraser that I've carved down into a wedge to give me a sharper edge when I need it. And there's some kind of suggestions of contrast up in here. I think I'm going to address the texture a little bit later once I get that primary volume done. So that's really the trick to texture, is that I find it most effective when it reinforces the structure of the object. And so it's not just an opportunity to provide detail. Texture it gives us information about the form. You know, how it reflects light gives us information about how rough or smooth the surface is. And the way it maps to the form of the subject helps to reinforce the form of the object. So I think when in doubt, kind of just reinforce the form. Go back to making sure that texture gives you some sort of information about the structure and the form of the object. And I'm going to, let's see, kind of sharpen up just a little bit lighter pressure, so I'm lifting a little bit less material in that water. So we're trying to create that contrast between the light here above water and then that reflection where the intensity of the light's diminished just a bit. I'm grateful for those comments there, Wilma, about helping to see, and that's hopefully, I couldn't ask for a better outcome. I think to me that's been the value of drawing. You know, I use drawing as a way to kind of ground myself and just into looking at things, and so really my interest in drawing came out of my interest in looking, because I found that just simply looking at objects was very soothing and helped me through some difficult moments. And then drawing just as a way to help to really connect with the world around us. So just kind of sharpening up some of these edges here. So one of the things that's also we start to understand about this situation here is that, you know, because the angle in terms of our relationship to the bridge is changing, you know, we're looking across this a little bit more. As we move across, we're looking more on the broad side of the inside of each of these arches. It's affecting how the light bounces off of that. So it starts to get brighter here because the light is bouncing more directly into our eyes in an interesting way. And then, you know, by contrast, and the reflected light on the outer surface is a little bit different. And I give a little bit less information in the reflections. Again, a little less contrast. A little less sharpness. There we go. And so I'm just going to, let that stay as it is. You are going to have your own take on that. Again, so you may be inclined to really render greater detail in that background, but because we're already an hour and 40 minutes in, I think, and I like just the mark making back in there. Maybe add a little bit of light catching on those rocks. I'm just going to, again, I'm going to let that set and then create additional depth by using a contrast in refinement. So refine these foreground areas and limit the refinement on the background. Deb is asking what brand is this? Is a Derwent retractable eraser. I've been digging it. Oh, Sue's asking, is it running hot? I don't know. It seems like the, I don't know what's going on with, I'm going to do a little bit of research and see why the computer is, or the camera seems to be cutting out, but I do think it has something to do with the capture card. And let's see, Beverly's saying, I might not draw another bridge like this, but now I know I won't die from the anxiety. That's good. And you teach understanding so well. Okay, oh, that's awesome. I'm glad to those comments. Yeah, I definitely understand that anxiety of like, oh my God, this is a tricky subject. Oh, I reached the end of the eraser. Definitely a tricky subject, but like I said at the top of the show, the way I kind of manage that in my own mind is to tell myself that, you know, that what a drawing has an opportunity to do is to capture the evolution of the artist's mind throughout that process, how the brain might be impacted by the drawing process, and how we might come to better understand this world through the art. And so the drawing showing that evolution can make for a rich experience. So when working with the reflection, there are a few different things to be aware of, and I think that's what makes reflection so tricky. Now in this case, we're not able to see into the water, and then so in like shallow streams, that can be a really fun opportunity where you have the reflection of the sky off the surface, you have the ripples, you have reflections of the trees and other surrounding things, as well as the transparency of the water itself, where you might be seeing the bottom of the water, of the stream. We don't have that here, but we have two things to be aware of. We have the reflection and the structure of the object that we're understanding in that reflection, as well as the surface of the water. Now, this scene was taken, this photo was taken, and I put the credit to the photo to the photographer in the description, so check that out. But you know, it's so calm here, we're not really getting any information about the surface. But when we're talking about changing the direction of our marks to reinforce the structure of the scene, when you're working with the water, you have a decision to make. You're either going to reinforce the structure of the object that's being reflected in the water, or you're going to reinforce the surface of that water. And so, you know, one tack you could take is to maybe have all of your marks here in the water run horizontally to reinforce that horizontal plane. Or like what I did here is I'm kind of ignoring the surface of the water and instead just focusing on the structure of the bridge that I'm seeing reflected in the water. So I'm utilizing vanishing points and things like that. So hopefully that makes sense. But I think it can be helpful to kind of make sure that that's a decision you're making with intention in your drawing, because it can you can take it any number of ways. All right, here, this is an important little wedge of light peeking out there. All right, now I can darken the underside of the bridge here. Again, being a little less precise here because it is a reflection, so that contrast between the sharp edge here and the jagged edge down here can reinforce that concept of the reflection there. Let's see, there's a bit of a kind of a darker spot right in here. So I'm going to bring that down. Sometimes the reflections kind of reveal something more than we can see, because we can't really see that here in the upper portion of the bridge. So I'm going to darken this even more. And now right here, there's a structure, some sort of support structure that I want to indicate. So before I place that, I'm just doing a quick check-in with regards to the other elements on the bridge here. So where, as I'm looking at that shape, the first thing I want to ask myself is, where do I need to place the shape? And then once I'm in the right spot, then I can capture that shape a bit more effectively. So there's a bit of a shadow under here. I don't really quite know what it is. There's a shadow here. Again, holding that kind of more intuitive understanding of how those lines should be if I were to envision them leading to that vanishing point off to the left. And they may not align exactly, but if you're in the ballpark, it can be good. And then you just kind of ask yourself, if a viewer to look at this, would it make sense? Is it sticking to the surface? Is it reinforcing the depth in the scene? Or is it conflicting with it? Now I think what I'm going to do, what do I want to do? This is cool, this stain here. So there's little holes in the bridge surface that allow the water to drain, and then it seems to stain the underside of it, and then it kind of diffuses out towards the bottom. That helps to, again, give it a little bit more structure. So this is where, as you're adding kind of refinement, as you're adding texture, asking yourself, what is that texture supplying me? What does it give me in terms of the form and information about the subject? And I have to look at the drawing on the screen, as the version that you're observing is from the camera overhead. I need to rely on that a bit more because of the way the light is reflecting off of the surface. I can't quite see what's happening directly in front of me, but I see it much more clearly in that photograph or in the camera's view. Now there's a kind of implied structure to the stones here. We can kind of suggest, but I want to be really careful with that to not make it too explicit. If I make that line too strong, it's going to be an indication to the viewer that it's a different object entirely, and it will no longer be mapped to the surface of the form. And that's not what we want to go for. Now that we have the basic structure established, that stays our primary goal. Just refining some of the ellipses here to see if there's any kind of wonkiness to them. If there are opportunities to smooth out the ellipse, I want to take that. So how's everybody's drawing coming together? Everybody good? I'm going to draw this form here. It's captured in the reflection just kind of loosely. I need to, oh, here it is. I was wondering where my eraser was, and it was in my hand. I've done that so many times, wondering where my brush is as it's in one of my hands. So if you are new, what you're watching is Drawing Together. My name's Scott Maier. This is a show that we meet every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern, to draw together with a new subject. Next week, I'll be posting a video of just a teapot, and it'll be a fun one. So the focus on that will be in edges, and I'm going to attempt the tinted charcoal. So something a little bit different. We haven't done that in a while, and many of you have reminded me of that medium. We used it just once before, and it was a lot of fun. So I've been hearing what you're saying and found a subject that I think will work really well for it. So we'll be working with some tinted charcoal for that. Now, as you're, in terms of these stones here, if our goal is to create an understanding of these kind of cobblestones, what I'm going to do right now is you just utilize the side of the pencil and try to indicate the shadow sides of these stones. And so I've got two kind of dimensions. Again, having that internal understanding of the perspective, I'm trying to visualize the path that I need to follow, that these stones are going to be built along. And then from there, I'm dropping those marks down. So I'm trying to visualize that path across here, for example, that leads to the vanishing point. And then drop in these marks that represent the shadow side of these cobblestones. So it's not a matter of drawing and rendering the stones, it's a matter of kind of dropping in shapes of light and shadow. I kind of lost some of the highlight in here so we can reestablish it. But it can be really helpful, again, to have that basic understanding of the path that these stones need to fall along in order to reinforce the depth of the structure. In that way, if, again, using texture to reinforce the form, that's the goal here. And if I wasn't thinking about that, then I run the risk of actually degrading the form. If I didn't get those paths correct and when I'm dropping those shadows in on the stones, then I run the risk of flattening out the whole scene. That whole structure would be lost, and we spent so much time trying to create that. I don't want to lose it now. Can indicate kind of more of that water line where there seems to be a bit of a stain along the surface that helps to create some separation there. And I'm just going to kind of suggest some of the texture along here. So just letting these marks kind of skip across the surface. My main focus is on that path more than anything, and just utilizing the side of the pencil and dropping it down periodically, just kind of letting it skip up and down along the path. And there's some really nice kind of patina on the bridge here on the stones that we can kind of capture, and again be thinking about the perspective there. You have some dark stones in there and light ones, and you want to be evaluating that based on the totality of the scene, not necessarily each individual stone is it precise, but when you take it all in, does it feel like it's reinforcing that structure? Do we get a better understanding of that form as a result of some of these marks that we're making? So this is where you can just have fun with the mark making. And you have this archway here of stones. Again, try to make sure you understand where the paths are, how they radiate out from the center, that we kind of change direction here. And I find that using the side of the pencil becomes a little bit more effective because it's a softer mark that can create those variations, but if we draw a line in there, it starts to muddy the scene a bit too much. It gets difficult to really interpret effectively. just sharpen up under here a little bit. So this has been a wild one today with all these technical difficulties, with this struggling, struggling through the structure of this. Again, I was really nervous. I'm not sure that I'm still 100% happy with this, but that's what this show is all about. Again, be kind to yourselves. If you're struggling with this, this is why we practice and we continually try to improve, and not just try to demonstrate our mastery all the time. So now we have kind of a contrast between these elements here that have a greater degree of texture and then these that have very little. And right now that contrast is significant where it feels a little disjointed. So what I need to do is just drop a little bit of texture in. There seems to be kind of this consistent kind of stain line through here. So I just need a little bit of a tie-in between those so that we kind of accept the reality of the diminished perspective there. And then that it feels like it's an intentional choice and not just that it's unfinished on the left side. All right, Marie, I'm glad you're looking forward to it. And then Greg is saying, so I had just a thought, but have you considered doing a 2-week drawing since week 1 being the form and light and shadow and next? That's a good idea. I have thought about that and I haven't pulled the trigger on it, but maybe there's an opportunity there to have something that can span multiple weeks. So, all right, yeah, doing the tinted charcoal. Glad there's some enthusiasm there. It's kind of tricky. I have a hard time bringing color into a drawing. It's very different when I'm painting because color is a part of the work from the very beginning, right? With drawing, it's been such a monochromatic pursuit for so long that it's a good opportunity for me to get comfortable thinking about color and how that might work in a drawing. But let me see, if we bring this up here, let's see, how did we do? Pretty close. A different kind of look and feel, added a little bit more texture to this, and I think we could probably continue on, but I know I've kept you both all for 2 hours. You put up with my technical issues. This is a lot of information here. It sounds like it resonated, but I want to hang on for a little bit if there are any lingering questions about this. If you are new, I want to welcome you. It's awesome to have new people. We get new people every week. We meet every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. On the weeks when I can't be live, I post a video at the same time. So just check back in every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern, and you'll find something new to watch here. So, and if I can't be live, it hurts me to not be live with you all. But sometimes there's other things here at work that take precedence. They need my attention. So I'm just gonna kind of hang out here a little bit, kind of tweak this around, see if there's any additional information. But I want to thank you all for joining me today, putting up with the technical challenges of being so supportive like you always are. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. So have a great week, and I will see you live in 2 weeks, but check out the recording coming next Wednesday. So. I'll pull out my electric eraser here to All right, I'm not seeing any other additional questions, so